So Audi is finally ready to launch its all-electric cars here in Malaysia. Alongside the sporty e-tron GT, we will also get this, the Q8 e-tron SUV. This obviously has a much more mainstream appeal, and it will go directly against the very popular BMW iX. Now here in Malaysia, this has quite a few surprises, especially when it comes to pricing. So let's take a closer look. So let's start with the prices. First, Audi Malaysia lately has been a bit over-ambitious, to say the least, when it comes to prices. The small A3 sedan, for instance, is priced closer to the Mercedes E-Class rather than the Mercedes A-Class sedan it's supposed to go against. But thankfully with this one, it's finally turning things around. The Audi Q8 e-tron over here hasn't been officially launched in Malaysia just yet, but we can already tell you it's going to be priced between 360 and 370,000 ringgit. That's not cheap by any means, but crucially it is more affordable than its key rival, the similarly sized BMW iX. That, by the way, even in its most basic form, is just over 400,000 ringgit. This car, in fact, is actually cheaper than the Mercedes-Benz EQC, which is a smaller SUV from a class below. Here in Malaysia, we like to say our cars are just so overpriced compared to the rest of the world. But with this car, believe it or not, it's actually cheaper to buy it here in Malaysia compared to the UK. Even within Audi Malaysia's range, a car of a similar size, the standard petrol-powered Q8, is over 2.5 times more expensive compared to this at nearly 900,000 ringgit. So yes, I'm going to say it again, the EV that you see right here, right now, is an absolute bargain to buy in Malaysia. The 360 to 370,000 ringgit price I've mentioned before is for the base Q8 e-tron Advanced 50 variant that you see over here. But soon there is going to be a more powerful, higher spec S-Line 55 version with a bigger battery, and that's going to be priced around 460,000 ringgit. On top of that, you can also choose the sportier coupe sportback versions of each variant for an extra 5 to 10,000 ringgit. It's always nice to have options. This being an EV, let's talk about the battery sizes and range. This Q8 e-tron Advanced 50 version gets a 95 kWh battery with a claimed maximum range of 410 kilometers. For the claim range, Audi Malaysia is taking a very conservative approach, because in other markets, I've seen the exact same variant being advertised with ranges up to 500 kilometers. Being conservative with range, I think, is the right way to go, because it's always better to under-promise and then over-deliver. For instance, the Mercedes-Benz EQS is advertised with range up to 800 kilometers, but in the real world, it's actually closer to just 600. Now, 600 kilometers is already very, very good in today's market, but against its claim range, it tends to be a little bit disappointing to the customers. This way, Audi claims 410, and customers can actually get 410 or even more. That is better for everyone, I think. The more expensive S-Line 55 version gets a slightly bigger battery at 114 kilowatt hours, and that brings the claimed maximum range up to 480 kilometers. As for charging, which you can access through this powered flap over here, the 50 version has an 11 kilowatt onboard AC charger. The 55 version brings this up to 22 kilowatt onboard charger, which is quite rare in the Malaysian market. This makes overnight home charging much quicker, taking just under 5 hours to get from 0 to 100% compared to over 9 hours on the standard 11 kilowatts. As for DC fast charging, the 50 version can take up to 150 kilowatts, while the 55 version can take up to 170 kilowatts. Both versions will go from 10% to 80% SOC in about half an hour. That is still relatively slow, because this car still runs the older 400 volt electrical architecture instead of the much more advanced 800 volt architecture we've seen in the Hyundai Ioniq 5, the Kia EV6, and even Audi's own e-tron GT. The difference is this car won't be able to take advantage of the super fast 200 or even 300 kilowatt chargers that are becoming more common here in Malaysia. And even when using the more typical 120 or 180 kilowatts, a car with 400 volts will take a longer time to charge compared to one with 800 volts. Now let's move on to performance. The Q8 e-tron Advanced 50 gets a dual motor all-wheel drive setup with power rated at 340 PS and 664 Newton meters of torque. That gets from 0 to 100 in just 6 seconds flat. The S-Line 55 version gets uprated to 408 PS, the same 664 torque, and it gets from 0 to 100 in just 5.6 seconds. Both versions have a limited top speed of 200 km per hour. By the way, despite this car sharing the exact same Q8 badge as the regular S-powered Q8, this has absolutely nothing to do with the regular car. In fact, when it was first launched back in 2018, this didn't even have the Q8 name. This was simply called the Audi e-tron because it was Audi's very first mass production EV at the time. It was only for the facelift that Audi renamed it as the Q8 e-tron to signify that this sits at the top of the range of its electric SUVs. So yes, in an overall sense, this may not be brand spanking new because it's about a 5-year-old design. But of course, we never got the original version here in Malaysia. And in fact, the facelift version was just unveiled at the end of 2022. So here, 6 months later, this is as new and fresh as cars get here in Malaysia. Plus, being a 2023 car, this car does come with Audi's brand new flat 2D logos. The S-Line 55 version will look slightly different to the car that you see here. Of course, it will get the sharper, sportier S-Line body kit all around, and even the grille will be a bit different with extra lighting on the single frame grille. The headlights are the far more advanced matrix units instead of the regular LED ones you see on this 50 here. The standard car runs on 20-inch wheels, although the tires don't appear to be EV specific. The S-Line 55 gets slightly bigger wheels at 21 inches, while the Sportback versions get red painted brake calipers instead of plain silver on this car. Another key difference between the variants are the side mirrors. The S-Line 55 versions gets rid of the traditional side mirrors, replacing them with external cameras sending a feed into the sides of the interior. This will be the very first car in Malaysia to be officially launched with such a system. As for size, at over 4.9 meters long, this is nearly identical to the BMW iX. But in terms of ride quality, this should prove far more comfortable than the BMW because it gets full adaptive air suspension system. The BMW rides on passive steel dampers and ride quality really suffers for it. The Audi Q8 e-tron, at least the SUV version, should be far more comfortable. At the back, the Q8 e-tron has a clean design with this full-width LED light, which I always like. Even the badging has been simplified with just Q8 on the tailgate and e-tron on the lower bumper. If this isn't quite as striking for you, you can also get the Coupe Sportback version with its looping roofline. That I think is well worth paying an extra 5,000 to 10,000 for. Inside is where the Q8 e-tron starts to show its age a little bit because after all, this is a 5-year-old design. It runs a triple screen setup, which does look very good, especially at night. I think it looks great, but it does have a few drawbacks. Audi was the first car brand in the world to market a fully digital virtual cockpit display, and it still works really well here. It's pin sharp, very nice to look at. The center screen, however, isn't quite as great. It's significantly smaller than most of its competition, and even its user interface is lagging behind both Mercedes-Benz and BMW. But of course, that's not going to be a big issue for most people because it has wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto as standard, obviously. The bottom screen houses all the aircon controls. Well, it does work quite well because it's always there as you drive along, and each click comes with a haptic feedback at the tip of your fingers as well, so you know whether you've pressed it or not. But however, the simple act of just changing the fan speed requires multiple clicks, like so, and then up and down, which, yeah, is just overly complicated. What I do really like is the inclusion of a physical volume knob down here and a really fancy gear selector that you just put your hands on top and then push it back for drive or push it forward for reverse, or P as button on the side. This works really well and it looks cool as well. As for build quality, this being an Audi, you would expect everything to be absolutely top-notch, but unfortunately that is not the case. The top half of the dashboard is covered in leather, which is really good, and even the bits that are not covered in hide is nice to the touch, high quality as well. But as you move further down the cabin, you start to see surfaces and plastics that are not quite up to the usual high standards of Audi, like this. This is so scratchy and so cheap, it does not belong on an Audi at all. Moving up to the S-Line 55 version gets you a panoramic sunroof, sport seats with nicer leather, the S-Line steering wheel, and of course the side screens to replace the side mirrors. As for the rear seats, the Q8 e-tron is a nice place to be in. As you can see, I've got plenty of legroom and headroom left, and for your reference, I am 167 centimeters tall. But even if you are north of 180, you shouldn't have any issue sitting in the back here at all. The seats are also very comfortable, with the base set at a normal height relative to the floor, so this avoids the typical high floor, high knees up in the air sitting position in most other EVs. In this car, you can sit in the back here and lounge for a couple of hours without anyone complaining, I think. The backrest unfortunately is fixed and you can't adjust it at all, but at the very least it's also set at a pretty decent angle to begin with. As for air conditioning, this car gets a full 4-zone climate control system, so even in the back here, each passenger can set their own temperature as well as fan speed, so that's nice to have. Plus, even better than that, you've got aircon vents down the center over here as well as on the B pillars. That is fantastic. Beyond that, you've also got manual sunshades for the rear windows, which is good to have, although the rear windows themselves only go down about this much. Yeah, I don't know why though. One last thing on build quality, the rear door cards are all hard compared to the soft ones in front. So yeah, overall this is a big disappointment for an Audi. As for the boot on the Q8 e-tron, it is pretty sizable at over 550 liters. It's nice and wide, very deep as well, although you do have to lift your things pretty high up to clear the lip over here. You also get a very large underfloor storage down here, and you can also see the space saver spare tire. This is pretty unique because you actually have to inflate it first before you use. It's here in its deflated form to take up even less space under the floor. As for the Sportback version, the sloping roofline does take up a little bit of space, but you still have over 500 liters left, so that's pretty decent. As with most other EVs, this car has a front trunk or a frunk or a fruit, whatever you want to call it. In this case, it is a pretty shallow load space that you can put, I think, just your charging cables and not much more. And speaking of the cover, yeah, it seems to be very poorly put together. I don't know what's going on here. As for safety, the Audi Q8 e-tron is absolutely top-notch. It has a full 5-star Euro NCAP crash safety rating, and unlike most other models within Audi Malaysia's range, this does get the full active safety systems. This includes front and rear autonomous emergency braking or AEB, adaptive cruise control, and lane keep assist, and so on for a full level 2 semi-autonomous driving systems. Even for passive safety, this car is excellent. This has 8 airbags as standard, including 2 rear side airbags, which are optional in most other markets, but as standard here in Malaysia. That is fantastic. So there you go guys, our early look at the brand new Audi Q8 e-tron electric SUV that is coming to Malaysia very soon. As you can see, it has quite a few surprises and a few disappointments as well. Over to you, would you get this over the BMW iX or the Mercedes-Benz EQC? Let me know in the comment section below. For now, thank you for watching and stay safe everyone.